Imagine waking up tomorrow and every single moment feels worth your attention. Your commute is fascinating. Data entry is absorbing. Waiting in line at the DMV is genuinely pleasant. You never fidget, never zone out, never catch yourself staring at the ceiling wishing you were somewhere else. That restless, nagging feeling that used to crawl under your skin when nothing seemed worth doing? Gone. Permanently. Sounds like a gift. Sounds like the cure for every wasted afternoon, every pointless meeting, every dead hour scrolling through your phone looking for something, anything, to latch onto. And for the first few days, that's exactly what it feels like. You sit through a 3-hour corporate training on workplace safety compliance, and you're locked in. You watch paint dry and find genuine satisfaction in the slow transformation of wet to matte. Your brain treats every stimulus with equal weight, equal interest, equal engagement. Nothing is dull. Nothing is tedious. Nothing makes you want to escape. But here's what nobody would notice at first. That itch you lost, that low-grade dissatisfaction that used to make you pick up a guitar for the first time, or quit a dead-end job, or wonder what would happen if you mixed two chemicals that had never been combined. That wasn't a flaw in your operating system. That was the operating system. And you just uninstalled it. This is what happens when boredom disappears forever. The first 2 weeks are extraordinary. Productivity numbers do something economists have never seen. Every factory worker, every accountant, every warehouse picker operates at full engagement for entire shifts. No clock watching, no mental drift, no bathroom breaks taken just to stare at a phone for 90 seconds of relief. Absenteeism drops by a third in the first week. Output per worker climbs steadily because nobody needs a mental reset. You don't burn out when nothing feels tedious. Managers can't believe what they're seeing. Tasks that used to require rotation, because no human could endure 8 straight hours of quality-checking bottle caps, now get done by a single person who finds the work completely absorbing. Training programs that used to lose half the room by slide 12 suddenly hold perfect attention through slide 200. The global economy lurches forward with a kind of mechanical joy. Every job feels like it matters. Every task feels like it deserves your full self. But something strange starts showing up in the data around day 10. Creative output begins to drop. Not dramatically at first. Ad agencies notice that brainstorming sessions produce more ideas, but fewer surprising ones. Architecture firms find their designers generating competent work that feels oddly safe. Writers hit their word counts without struggle, but produce pages that read like they were assembled rather than created. Musicians compose songs that are technically flawless and emotionally vacant. The work across every creative field shares the same unsettling quality. It is clean, polished, and completely predictable. Researchers at the University of Central Lancashire ran an experiment years before any of this happened. They split subjects into 2 groups. One group did a creative task immediately. The other group had to copy phone numbers out of a directory for 15 minutes first, one of the most boring tasks ever designed for a laboratory setting, and then did the same creative task. The group that was bored first crushed it. Their ideas were more original, more numerous, and more varied. Boredom didn't just fail to inhibit creativity, it supercharged it. The brain, starved of interesting input, started manufacturing its own. This is because your brain has a network that only activates when you're doing nothing useful. Neuroscientists call it the default mode network, and it's the most misunderstood piece of cognitive architecture you own. When you're bored, truly, properly, staring at the wall bored, this network fires up and starts doing something that looks from the outside like idleness. Your brain begins connecting memories that have no logical relationship. It drags up a conversation from 6 years ago and mashes it against a physics problem you read about this morning. It wanders through emotional landscapes and spatial memories and hypothetical futures, stitching together patterns that your focused, task-oriented mind would never allow. This is where insight comes from. Not from working harder, not from paying closer attention. From the moments when your brain gets so unstimulated that it starts rummaging through its own storage and finds combinations nobody asked for. Newton wasn't doing calculus when gravity clicked. He was sitting under a tree with nothing to do. Archimedes wasn't running experiments when displacement hit him. He was taking a bath. Einstein's special relativity started not in a lab, but during idle thought experiments he ran while bored at his patent office desk. The pattern is so consistent, it almost looks like a rule. Major cognitive breakthroughs don't happen during focus. They happen during the mental wandering that boredom forces you into. But that's not the worst part, because losing creative insight is a slow bleed. What happens next is a hemorrhage. By the end of month 1, something shifts in how people make decisions, or more accurately, how they stop making them. Boredom is a signal, a deeply uncomfortable, evolutionarily ancient signal that says, what you're doing right now is not a good use of your time. Find something better. That signal drove your ancestors out of safe caves and into unknown territory. It made them cross rivers and mountain ranges and oceans, not because they had maps or destination in mind, but because staying put felt unbearable. Boredom is the emotional engine of exploration, and every major expansion in human history has its fingerprints. Without that signal, nobody leaves. The accountant who dreamed of opening a restaurant never does, because accounting feels perfectly fine. The researcher stuck on a dead-end project never pivots, because dead ends feel exactly as engaging as breakthroughs. The teenager in a small town who would have clawed their way to a city, started a band, launched a company, learned a language, stays. Not because they chose to, because leaving never occurs to them. The discomfort that would have pushed them out the door doesn't exist anymore. Career mobility drops to near zero within 6 months, not because jobs get better, because every job feels equally fine. The labor market doesn't just slow down, it freezes. And with it, the mechanism that has redistributed human talent for all of recorded history grinds to a halt. People aren't in the wrong jobs because they can't leave. They're in the wrong jobs because nothing feels wrong. Think about what that means on a civilizational scale. The entire history of human migration was powered in part by boredom. The Polynesian navigators who crossed thousands of miles of open ocean in wooden canoes didn't all leave because of famine or war. Some of them left because the island they were on had stopped being enough. The westward expansion across North America, the European age of sail, the push to the poles, the space race, restlessness drove all of it. Not pure survival, not pure ambition. The unbearable sensation that where you are and what you're doing is no longer sufficient. That sensation is boredom at its most powerful, and without it, the species that colonized every continent and reached for the moon would never have left the first valley. But that's not the worst part, because while adults are settling into permanent contentment with whatever they happen to be doing, something far more damaging is happening to children. Developmental psychologists have been saying this for decades, long before boredom disappeared. A child who is never bored never learns to generate their own entertainment, and a child who never generates their own entertainment never develops the internal creative architecture that becomes adult imagination. When a kid sits on a rainy afternoon with nothing to do and no screen to reach for, something critical happens. They start building worlds. They pick up sticks and the sticks become swords or telescopes or conductor's batons. They invent games with rules that don't make sense and characters that don't exist and stories that go nowhere but branch in 12 directions at once. This isn't play. This is the construction phase of creative cognition. Studies from the early 2020s had already started documenting what happens when you remove boredom from childhood through constant stimulation. Children with unlimited screen access, whose boredom was interrupted every few seconds by a new video, a new swipe, a new dopamine pulse, showed measurably lower scores on creative thinking assessments. They could consume and reproduce. They struggled to originate. They had never needed to build something from nothing because nothing was never allowed to arrive. Now multiply that by removing boredom entirely, not just masking it with screens, but eliminating the sensation at its neurological source. The first generation of children born into a world without boredom would grow up without ever experiencing the cognitive pressure that forces imaginative development. They would be attentive, obedient, engaged, focused, and creatively hollow. They would learn facts, but never wonder about them. They would absorb information, but never recombine it into something that didn't exist before. And because nobody around them is bored either, nobody notices the absence. How would you? The kids seem fine. They're paying attention. They're doing their work. The emptiness is invisible because it manifests as compliance. Now let's talk about something that seems completely unrelated, but isn't. Boredom is one of the most reliable early warning systems your brain has for physical safety. When you're driving on a long, straight highway and the road is empty and nothing is happening, you get bored. That boredom doesn't feel like a safety mechanism, but it is. The discomfort of monotony forces you to refocus. You sit up, you adjust your mirrors, you scan the road with renewed attention. Boredom is the alarm that goes off when your vigilance drops, and it's saved more lives than most people will ever realize. Without boredom, monotonous attention doesn't trigger any corrective response. Your focus doesn't drop sharply. That would be noticeable. It erodes. Gradually, imperceptibly, your eyes stay on the road, but your engagement with the task of driving dissolves into comfortable autopilot. You feel fine. You feel attentive. You are not. The gap between perceived attention and actual attention becomes a canyon. And the first time most people discover the canyon is when they drift across a lane divider at 70 miles an hour. Traffic fatality rates begin climbing within the first 3 months. Not from reckless driving, from comfortable driving. From the kind of relaxed inattention that would have triggered a boredom response and forced a correction, if boredom still existed. Long-haul trucking, air traffic control, nuclear plant monitoring, surgical anesthesiology. Every profession that depends on sustained attention during low-stimulus conditions sees failure rates spike. Not because people stop caring, because their brains never send the signal that says you're not paying close enough attention. But that's not the worst part, because the safety failures are at least visible. The next thing boredom takes with it is almost impossible to measure until the damage is already irreversible. Addiction specialists have known for years that boredom and substance abuse are locked in a complicated embrace. People who score high on boredom proneness are significantly more likely to develop addictions. The restless discomfort of having nothing satisfying to do sends people searching for stimulation, and drugs and alcohol provide a shortcut. So you might expect that removing boredom would reduce addiction. No more restless seeking, no more desperate need for stimulation. Problem solved. Except, boredom doesn't just drive people toward substances. It also drives them away. When you've been drinking every night and you wake up hungover and the day stretches ahead of you with nothing to show for it, that flat gray feeling of wasted time is boredom. And that boredom is the thing that makes you think, maybe this isn't working. Maybe I should try something different. Boredom with your own destructive patterns is one of the most powerful engines of recovery that exists. Therapists and rehab programs talk about it all the time. The patient has to get bored with being an addict before they're ready to change. Without boredom, that moment never arrives. Every drink feels as engaging as the first. Every hit carries the same sense of purposeful activity. The internal feedback loop that used to say, "This is repetitive, this is going nowhere, you've done this before and it didn't help." Silent. Addiction rates don't just climb, they lock in. People don't spiral because spiraling implies movement. They settle, comfortably, permanently, into whatever pattern they happen to be in when boredom disappears, whether that pattern is healthy or catastrophic. And this same mechanism tears through relationships with surgical precision. Relationships generate boredom. All of them. Even the best ones. The Sunday afternoon where you've run out of things to say. The 10th year where the routines feel like grooves worn into stone. That boredom is uncomfortable, and it's supposed to be. It's the signal that says something needs to change. Maybe you need a new shared project. Maybe you need to have a difficult conversation. Maybe you need to leave. But the signal exists because relationships require maintenance, and boredom is the maintenance light on your dashboard. Without it, nothing feels stale. The relationship that stopped growing 3 years ago feels exactly as comfortable as the day it started. The partner who checked out emotionally still feels like an engaging presence, because engagement is all you can feel. Couples don't fight less, They might fight the same amount, but they never have the creeping realization that the fighting has become the whole relationship and there's nothing underneath it anymore. That realization requires boredom. It requires the ability to sit in a room with someone and feel the deadness of the air between you and think, is this all there is? People stay forever. Not in love, in position. There's a quieter casualty here too. Friendships. The best friendships in your life probably started because you were bored in the same place at the same time as someone else. Waiting for a class to start. Stuck at a party where you didn't know anyone. Killing time in a break room. Boredom made you look around and reach out because the alternative was sitting alone with the discomfort of having nothing to do. Without that discomfort, people don't reach. They don't need to. The person sitting next to them might be their future best friend, but initiating a conversation requires a gap that needs filling, and the gap doesn't exist anymore. Social networks slowly calcify, not because people become antisocial, because they never feel the restless itch that used to make strangers talk to each other. By the end of the first year, the world looks productive and stable and completely, profoundly stuck. Innovation has slowed to a crawl because nobody is restless enough to pursue a wild idea when the safe idea feels equally satisfying. Scientific research continues, but the bold leaps, the kind that come from a researcher sitting in frustrated boredom with a failed experiment and suddenly seeing the failure from an angle nobody considered, those leaps stop. What remains is incremental, competent, safe. The COVID lockdowns proved this mechanism in reverse. When millions of people were forced into extended boredom, with nowhere to go and nothing to do, creativity erupted. People baked bread from scratch, taught themselves instruments, wrote novels, launched businesses, learned languages, built furniture, started podcasts. Not because they were inspired, because they were bored out of their minds, and their brains demanded they do something, anything, that hadn't been done before. That wave of creation wasn't a quirk of pandemic culture. It was a direct neurological consequence of sustained boredom activating the default mode network at scale. The whole world daydreamed at once, and what came out was a surge of originality that no productivity program or innovation lab has ever matched. That mechanism is now gone, and nobody misses it because missing things requires a sense that something is absent, and absence is a cousin of boredom. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is philosophical, and it's the one that would have made Kierkegaard nod with grim satisfaction. Boredom is the only emotion that forces you to confront the question of meaning directly. Anger tells you something is wrong. Joy tells you something is right. Fear tells you something is dangerous. Boredom tells you nothing is happening, and then waits for you to decide if that's acceptable. It's the gap between stimulus and meaning, the pause where your brain asks not what should I do, but why should I do anything at all? Philosophers from the existentialists to the Stoics recognized boredom as the doorway to self-examination. You can't ask what your life is for when every moment feels full. You can only ask that question in the emptiness. Without boredom, the question dissolves. Not because people find meaning, because the search for meaning requires a catalyst, and the catalyst is the sensation that your current moment is meaningless. Take that sensation away, and you get a species that is permanently engaged, permanently satisfied, and permanently unable to ask whether the engagement and satisfaction are directed at anything that matters. You get billions of people doing things that feel fine without ever pausing to wonder if fine is enough. Every religion, every philosophical tradition, every great work of literature that wrestled with the purpose of human existence grew from a moment when someone sat still long enough to feel the weight of an empty hour and refused to accept it. That refusal was boredom, and it built cathedrals. The irony is almost too precise to bear. Humanity spent thousands of years trying to eliminate boredom, inventing entertainment, building civilizations, creating art, launching rockets. And every one of those achievements was powered by the very thing they were trying to escape. Boredom didn't slow humanity down. Boredom was the fuel. It was the discomfort that refused to let you sit still, the whisper that said, "This isn't enough," the cognitive itch that could only be scratched by making something that didn't exist before. And the moment it vanished, so did the itch. So did the whisper. So did every future that would have been built by someone staring at a ceiling, uncomfortable with the emptiness, reaching for a pencil or a wrench or a telescope, because staying still had finally become unbearable. The world without boredom doesn't collapse. That's what makes it so dangerous. It hums along, productive and pleasant and perfectly content. Nobody suffers, nobody rebels, nobody looks up from what they're doing and thinks there has to be more than this. And that's the thing about boredom that nobody appreciates until it's gone. It was never the enemy. It was the voice that kept saying, "You're capable of something better." And now the room is quiet.